Women are often guilted and shamed when it comes to discussing sex or expressing themselves sexually. And typically, the conversation between parents and their young daughter is just don't get pregnant. It is time for a new discussion. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Ladies Listen Up. I am your host, Gwendolyn G.R. Houston Jack. Now, I already know that talking about, discussing, even mentioning sex is a taboo topic in our society. And typically, when we talk about it, it's with a male perspective. We rarely hear about what women want, what women desire, or even how to pleasure us. And even if there is a commercial, it still is about him and his ego. So I'll go ahead and put that out there. As a matter of fact, the main thing we typically hear is, I want a lady in the streets and a freak in the sheets. But how do we get there if there is never a safe space for women to talk about sex? Just like get into those nitty gritty things. But guess what? I have someone who is going to help us start that conversation. So if you're somewhere in the middle trying to figure out where your pleasure principles lie, we're going to change that today. All right, everybody, you have to welcome Josie Pickens, someone I hold near and dear to my heart. Hold near and dear. Let me tell you really quick about Josie before we get into this amazing conversation. Josie is a writer, speaker, organizer, and educator. Her work focuses on conversations around race, gender, sexuality, and pleasure. Josie, welcome to Ladies Listen Up. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation around women and pleasure. Such an important
You know, I'm sitting here thinking to myself about how much work in this particular area that needs to be unlearned for women of my age and generation to really start receiving the pleasure that we need, want, and deserve. I mean, am I off? Am I kind of, because it really is just girls don't get pregnant. Boys, well, make sure you have this and make sure you have this. Go out and sow your wild oats and all that whatnot. But when it comes to sex, it's just, well, keep your legs
Keep your
closed.
legs closed, and if you open them, make sure that man is pleased.
Right.
You know.
So let us get right into it. Ladies, let's talk about sex. All right. So I know we only have so much time here. So I'm really trying to cram everything I can in. Okay, so let me start with this one. Why do you believe women have struggled with discussing and expressing themselves sexually?
I mean, it's the patriarchy. It is that we live in a heteronormative patriarchal society where only we are taught and socialized to believe that only men are important. And so when we're thinking about that from the perspective of pleasure, then only the pleasure of men is important. I think also when we're talking about Black women, there is a historical perspective that we have to think about when we think about the fact that Black women's bodies were essentially utilized to bring wealth to this nation, right? Through chattel slavery. And so when we think about Black women and sex and pleasure, like sex was something that was used essentially to create a product that could be bought and sold in this country. So pleasure was never a part of that conversation. And I
Mhm.
also think that part of the way that we dehumanized Black women when we're looking at history was to make it seem as though, oh, Black women are like breeders, like animals, sexually
Mhm.
voracious. They
Mhm.
just want sex all the time. And so we have to give it to them. That's how we allow space for them to be bred. That's how we allow space for them to endure rape and all other kinds of sexual violence that Black women experienced during chattel slavery. So all of that is a part of it. So when we're coming out of this system of slavery, Black women are like, wait, I need to be seen and respected and valued as a lady, right? So here again, we're
Yeah.
coming into this white heteronormativity, this patriarchal idea of like what it means to be a lady. You have to be chaste, you have to be respectable, and you have to like, ladies don't talk about their other parts, their under parts, their nether parts, right? Ladies don't talk about what pleasure is supposed to feel and look like for them. And because Black women were coming from this hypersexual narrative
Mm.
into like trying to fit into this white heteropatriarchal narrative of like being a lady, well, there just wasn't any space for us to explore what pleasure meant. I think that as
Ugh.
we opened up conversations around pleasure, for many of us, we felt that it opened us up to certain kinds of danger, right? Like you remember
Yeah.
growing up and being a young girl and like you're fast. If you want to show your body, even if your body is
Yes.
developing beyond your control and
Yes.
it
It's
can
your
be
fault.
seen, that's your fault and you're being fast, right? You're doing things
Mhm.
that are going to
Mhm.
attract attention to you and your body. And it's like through all of that, where is there time to have conversations about like what feels good, what we want to experience?
Mm.
Where is there time to figure out how to even think about that, let alone communicate it to someone else?
Well, this is perfect because I wanna take a little bit of time, just to go back to what you mentioned, because I never really thought about that. Yes, sex was used as a tool to create a
Yeah.
product. I mean, I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I've ever really thought about it that way," but those are
Right.
facts. So when it comes to Black women, we know that there are stereotypes around it, and you have already gone into it, that we're hypersexualized from a very young age. Like you don't even get, as you say, a choice to determine. Sometimes you just are built a certain
Mm,
way, and they blame the young
mhm,
lady for being fast or
yeah.
being unladylike, like all the things we have to try to hide and play down what is
Mhm,
naturally there. So, what are some of those stereotypes around Black women? Because I immediately, as you were talking about the stereotypes, and we'll go into this too, but there is a place when Black women take charge of their
mhm,
sexuality and express their freedom, they now become this other. It's like, well, she's not
mhm.
ladylike. And we have to protect Black women. So you feeding into this stereotype is just what they want. Is like, stop. Just like, stop. So stereotypes about around Black women and sex, and you go into that.
Yeah, like I always call it the whole tape, right? So I have this theory of there's a whole tape that plays in the heads of like Black girls and Black women
Mhm.
as they are blossoming and coming into themselves. And that whole tape could sound like anybody. It could sound like, your church mother. It could sound like your real mother. It could sound like other women in the community who are constantly judging you, right? Oh, look at how you're
Mm.
dancing. You're dancing like a whore. Look at, oh, you want to wear red lipstick. Oh, those jeans are too tight. I mean, it's just like these random things that
Yes.
automatically moved you into being what we call, in the Black community, like a hoe, And so it's this hoe tape. And
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
a recording that I say plays as you are trying to move through just experience and trying to understand what you like, what your body likes, what you respond to, right? Like what turns you on, maybe sexually, or maybe just through pleasure and intimacy, because pleasure does not equal sex. All the right?
Yes.
That's
Right.
and I don't
Right.
know if we have time for that conversation, but hello, I would like for everyone to read Adrienne Marie Brown's Pleasure Activism, which is a book that explores pleasure in all kinds of ways that includes sex, but also includes self pleasure. Because pleasure could be anything like taking a walk. Anyway, I'm pausing because I'm thinking about time. We have limited
Yeah. No, you are good. You are perfectly
limited
fine.
time to discuss this, but yeah, I call it the whole take. So these are the stereotypes that we think about. Like anything pretty much can make you a hoe. Like anything that's explorative,
Everything. Everything.
anything that would make space for you to explore so that you can figure out what you like and what you don't like. Talking about
Mhm,
sex, um,
mhm.
um, having sexual education sometimes. Right?
Yeah.
I think we have had a conversation about this before where I was speaking to a guy that I knew once and I talked about how I would keep condoms. Like at my home, I carry
Mhm,
my own
mhm.
condoms or I would keep my own condoms. This is an issue of sexual health. This was like in the late 90s, 2000s, somewhere up in there when HIV
Mhm,
was a
mhm.
real epidemic in Black communities. Like, I wanted to be safe. And I had all of this knowledge about sexual health, but that made me into, oh, a man might see that as undesirable. A man might see that, oh, it's like, oh, you're a hoe because I want to be safe, because I want to
Right.
live.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like these are some of the stereotypes that women and particularly Black women, because that's my experience, so that's what I'm speaking
Mhm,
from, have
mhm.
to contend with even before they get to conversations around like, oh, I like this, I do not like this. My body enjoys this, my body does not
Mhm.
enjoy this. So even before we can have conversations about what we desire, we have to contend with all of these other kinds of conversations, like, body count conversations and all of this foolishness.
When we talk about body count, and I know we don't have the time for it,
So,
but at the end of the day, whether you male or female or
mm,
whatever, you're at a certain point. I mean, if we want to just be
listen,
like everybody's on the same page of being judged, hoe could be a hoe. I
I
don't,
am
like it's the
the
same
only,
thing. But we know that guys do it as well. I've had like 50, 60 women and blah blah.
and if
It's,
you are a
yeah,
woman and you've had two, it's too many. I always say, do you want to
right.
know how many people I slept with, or do you want to know that I am disease free? And I don't like using words like clean and dirty, but like I am
Yes.
sexually
No.
healthy. That's the question.
Yes.
That's the only question I will answer. Okay, and I'm
Yeah. Gotta
47,
ask
honey,
that.
because
So so
I
let
don't
me
know is my
um
answer. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But what I tell you,
we need
regularly go to
to
the
that's a
doctor
good
and
one
get
though.
checked up, and things are working the way that they're supposed to work over here.
You know, that type of transparency and clear communication literally freaks out some
Mhm.
people because it has always been the guy who takes
Right.
charge. And again, we're just I know we're using male and female, what have you, and it could be more of a personality, but looking at society the way it has always been, again, from a male
Mhm.
perspective, that he is the one who brings the condom and he initiates the contact and he takes care. And the woman's idea is to just pretty
Yeah.
much be there. I mean, she could be a hole in the
You
mattress for
show
all
up
we
and you
care.
receive.
So
That is your
I know,
responsibility and
right?
your job.
That's
Anything other than that, you are
that's
doing
about
too
it.
much in the bedroom.
So let's talk about Black women. And I know this is really for women altogether, but we're looking from our own experience. When it comes to the struggle of sharing your wants and
Mm,
your needs with your partner, you mentioned those stereotypes are running through your
mhm.
head. They're running through. Do you believe that is the primary reason why so many Black women sort of have these conversations, let's say in dark, alleyways and behind
Yes,
like closed doors and not around, because they're concerned about how they're going to be judged by their mothers, the community, and
mhm. Oh,
everybody else.
absolutely, and the men that they want to partner with, right? Because
Mm,
what we are told that women who, um, know who they are sexually, articulate who they are sexually, and just seem unafraid of being sexual beings, that they are undesirable. They're not marriage
yeah.
material, they're quote unquote for the streets. This is the narrative that so many, especially women of a certain age, have been taught. Now, I am so proud of younger women who are pushing back against these narratives and choosing something different for themselves and openly talking about sex and pleasure. But for women who are, you and I are, moving towards 50, hello, but we look good,
Yes.
honey. Let's not forget that. But as we're moving towards 50, when we think about women of our generation and our mother's generation, like this is
Mhm,
not something that makes you desirable for
mhm,
partners. It's definitely
yeah.
something that I'm sure I've run into. I've really kind of never cared, but what I can say is that my earliest sexual experiences included both self pleasure and partners who were invested in my pleasure and didn't
Mm,
judge
mm,
me for wanting to experiment and figure out what I enjoyed, how I enjoyed giving or receiving pleasure. Like I never felt guilt or shame around that. And I think because I had those kinds
yeah.
of foundations, it made it easier for me to first of all understand that there are men, masculine folks, whatever, other folks out there who um do not feel that a woman who knows who she is sexually is someone who is undesirable to them or someone that they only
Mm,
want to fool with in the dark. Like I've been in
yeah.
relationships, I have been in, couple marriages, I've had some engagements here and there. And so, I'm highly desirable. But no, but I but I always show up as my full self. I think some of that
Mhm,
confidence when we're talking around sex and sexuality and pleasure just comes from like those early foundations. I didn't necessarily get
yeah.
those foundational conversations through conversations like with my parents or my mother or like that, but
Mhm,
I did find my way with lovers who like allowed space for me to be fully who I am. And I think that that's what women have to search
mhm.
for.
Yeah, because I'm thinking to myself, like, my mother, she was a minister. So we got the abstinence
Right.
conversation, right? And yes, my nephew was born when I was a teenager in high school. So trust that when that happened, it scared
Oh,
me
yes.
straight. We put on the chastity belt and I threw that key in
Yeah.
the ocean. Couldn't nobody find it. I was like, it ain't happened, Captain. But when it was time, you know how guys get into a place like down, and you're just like, this is it. And then you don't realize that that's not the thing you probably ought to say. Because we didn't have that conversation, right? We didn't have that foundation. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes. Oh, that's a whole other
yes.
conversation is
I
communicating
know,
what
very
you
important.
want and communicating what you don't want, and also communicating,
Yeah,
like, being displeased sexually. There's a huge
yeah,
orgasm gap, right? Y'all look it
huge.
up. It's Googleable, right? That says that people
Well,
who orgasm the most are men, masculine folks, particularly hetero, cisgender men.
mhm,
And
mhm,
the people who
mhm,
orgasm the least are straight women.
yeah,
Women who have
yeah.
sex.
I remember that. I remember reading that. I do remember because it is something that needs to be discussed. There's so many layers here, which brings us to our next question, right? Because I'm looking at again my own history, and I'm not gonna even call it a faux pas because I was like, this is it. But at the moment, that was probably not the thing to say. But how do women define what is pleasure for them and not feel that a shame or attach the shame to
I
it?
think that I mentioned earlier Adrienne Marie Brown's book Pleasure Activism, I think is a great place
Mhm,
to start if you're a reader. Self-pleasure is how you pleasure map, right? So pleasure mapping is when we think about mapping, we're thinking about like X marks the spot, right? Like where are the spots? Pleasure mapping is you figuring out for yourself, where are the spots? And that comes through the practice of self pleasure. And self pleasure doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, it's time where I have my rose. I'm sure we all know about the rose toy, but self pleasure can start with anything from like mirror play, right? A lot of times, self pleasure
mhm.
starts with self affirmation and like acceptance.
Yeah.
So, spending time alone with your body in the
Mhm,
nude, looking
mhm.
at your body, um, and in a way that is without judgment, where you just accept your body and then move into loving your body in all of its imperfections, because none of us have perfect bodies, unless we have a lot of money to pay for it, right?
And is that even
Right,
perfect?
exactly, because there's
I mean, I'm
always
just
something. There'll be
to
a
each his
bump or
own.
a lump
Each his own.
somewhere. Yeah, I'm
Always.
waiting for all of these
Yeah.
BBLs for gravity to hit after some years, but at any rate, it is learning how to love and enjoy the skin that you're in, learning how to pleasure map, touching yourself,
Mhm,
you know? I
mhm.
always tell people every time I take a shower, I go through the process of, like, oiling my body after. Every single time. I'm going to take the time to do that, and I'm a lot of times, I'm looking in the mirror when I do that. I'm not rushing through the process of that. That's
Mhm,
a good way to start your pleasure mapping, right? It's like being good to your body, making sure that you
mm,
feel sensual and sexual for yourself first, doing that pleasure
yes.
mapping to figure out, "Okay, where do I like to be touched?" Because there are all kinds of ways to reach orgasm also. Most women do not
Mhm,
reach orgasm through penetration. Most women reach
mhm,
orgasm through other types of stimulation, everything from clitoral stimulation.
mhm.
There is like nipple, and breast orgasms that you can have. So like doing that pleasure mapping to figure out what is it that my body likes, and then giving
Mm,
yourself that. Until you can give
yes.
yourself that, you can't teach somebody else how to give it to you.
Which we've been talking about, like, you have to have 100% self-love, and people say it's cliche, but it's not. If you don't love yourself, all of
Right.
yourself, it's just really hard for someone else to do it or for you to do it for somebody else. Like, you just
Yeah.
have to you gotta wrap your arms around
And it's
all
an
of this.
ongoing journey. I when I talk about self-love, a lot
Yeah.
of times I always make sure that I mention it as a journey and not a destination, because I don't know that we ever reach a full actualization of that, because we are constantly
Mhm,
changing. We are
mhm.
discovering things
Well, that's
about
perfect.
ourselves. You know what I mean? So, like,
That's
as our bodies
you
are
know,
changing, my body is changing. So the
uh,
ways that I used to love my body, now I'm like, oh, I got some other things to love now. Love this
yes.
new thing that has popped up. It's a journey that we are constantly on and constantly like adjusting to. And that is not only just the way that our bodies look, but like the way that our minds work. There's self-forgiveness and grace that comes into that when we are learning and growing
Mhm.
as human beings. So yes, self-love has to be a part of that, because there simply cannot be we can't reach our fullest potential in pleasure, and we can't be
Mhm.
comfortable with communicating what it is that is pleasurable for us if we aren't comfortable in the skin we're in.
Well, that's a perfect segue because we love to leave our viewers with ways to do the
Mm,
work. So let's get into some ideas to begin one's sexual journey. Right, now you've already started it for us. Tell us about pleasure
Right.
mapping. What are some other ways? And you can, if you want to, even share more books or things that people can begin, I say people, but
Yeah.
women can begin starting their sexual journey and identifying pleasure
So
for
we talked
themselves.
about, self pleasure. Most of us, want to experience pleasure with other people. And so we have to work on developing these other types of intimacies outside of physical and sexual intimacy. When we develop our ability to be emotionally available, it
Mm,
offers us the opportunity to increase our ability to have emotional intimacy, and then that makes conversations around sex and pleasure easier. It makes it easier for us to explore because we feel safe. So another thing that we have to work on as we develop our love for ourselves is figuring out how we define safety for ourselves, how we just
mm,
define emotional safety and emotional intimacy, and figuring out how to make sure that we are available for that, right? And to make sure that we are in relationships that um, offer space for that, right? Because you're not going to
yeah.
have good sex if you don't feel safe.
Ugh. Here's the deal. I'm gonna go ahead and say it because people, again, they're like, "Oh, how can you?" I do recall a time where I was not
Mm,
satisfied, and I was like, "Bruh, I'm sorry, but we got to fix this." Like, I tell you, you might was going to get back to work. And I know for him, he was like,
right.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the world we were living in.
And G, you are someone who figures out how to speak your mind. A lot of women would just
Yes,
hold on to that and just be like, okay, hoping it gets better. And then here you are, 20 years into a marriage with bad sex. I have known women who are in their 30s and 40s, married women who are like, I have never had an orgasm,
right.
you know? Never. And probably because they
Yeah,
don't feel comfortable being like, hey, sir, or ma'am, or
hmm
whomever, person, this ain't
hmm
it.
yeah.
This ain't
This is
This
this
ain't
ain't
that
it.
thing. The thing is not thinging. And like I said, in order to feel comfortable having those conversations, you have to feel safe too, and you have to develop emotional
Yeah,
intimacy. You have to develop your own threshold for that. Because so many of
yeah.
us have so many hangups around sex, around our bodies, that we ourselves don't know how to foster and open ourselves up to emotional intimacy. And so we end up connecting with people who also are emotionally distant, emotionally
Mm,
neglectful, and good sex just is not going to be a product of that. And so that's
yeah.
another thing
Ugh.
that we have to think about, like where do we need to do our work so that we can become more open and authentic, so that then we can invite in the pleasure that we want.
You know what? This is it's an onion, and there are layers after
Layer.
layers after layers. So I do want to give people a chance. I want to give you a chance because thank you so much for just having this very great start for those of us who want to be our
Mhm.
authentic selves and make sure that every part of our life is satisfied. How can people connect with you and learn more from you?
Hey, listen, follow me on social media. I am rarely on Twitter and X anymore. I used to be over there all the time, but billionaires ruin everything, you know? So I'm not on Twitter as much, but I am definitely on Instagram, where I share a lot of my writing and links and things there. So you can follow me on IG at Joe Nubian, JoNubian, and I am Josie Pickens, JosiePickens on Facebook. And I always say I've entered my auntie season because I enjoy being on Facebook more than Twitter these days. But those are two places that you can reach me, and feel free to message me if you have any questions. And I have all kinds of writing all around the World Wide Web around sex and pleasure. So feel free to, Google me, okay? Because your girl is Googleable.
Well, thank you so much for giving us this time. And as we always say to everybody, give yourself the space and grace to grow and learn. Thank you.